All right. Well, welcome to all of you who have joined us online here tonight. We are recording this presentation so others can view it in the future. There are some slides that you should be seeing on your screen, and those will be available after the presentation as well. So just a overview of our presentation tonight. First, we'll start with the current year, 2022 finances. We'll look at the operating budget financial statement, and then we'll look at the balance sheet, and that will also include the camping program finance estimates to date. And the operating budget is really our focus, but we also want to take questions on all Mission Center finances tonight. And we'll pause after that section, and then we'll turn our attention to next year, the preliminary budget proposal, the comments we have on that budget, and the financial commitment form for congregations to fill out. We'll go through all of that and then pause and take questions on anything looking ahead to next year and other information you might need for your congregations as they consider commitments. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with just a little bit of information on the fall conference and time for any final questions that might not have been addressed yet. So hopefully you saw on the registration page the preliminary budget packet with all of the information. There's a link here. I'm going to put it in the chats as well for those who are online right now. Looks like it's sending, said it was sent successfully. So if you didn't already get it, you should be able to find it in the chats. But that'll continue to be available on the event page on the website. Pastors and financial officers should have that as well, and we'll keep sharing that. And then just to give an overview of the budget process timeline, how we're going about our process. This year, the packet I just mentioned was sent out on July 20th to pastors and financial officers, put out in the Mission Center announcements. Tonight, we're having the online presentation and input session. Again, that'll be recorded and available after tonight. And from now and then until September 15th, congregations have the chance to look at this information and hold their conferences or business meetings to consider their commitments for next year. So we ask again that those all be sent in by September 15th or as soon as possible. The staff will then review all those commitments, and we'll look at if we need to make adjustments, if we get more than we expected, less than we expected in commitments. We will kind of reshape our proposal as needed. On October 2nd, we have a meeting scheduled with the Mission Center Council. So we'll reevaluate, dialogue with them on changes. And then the deadline for legislation from congregations is October 6th. So we'll wait to see if anything might come from a congregation at that point that might impact finances in any way. And then that following week, we will finalize, if we haven't already, by October 15th, a budget proposal to go to the conference. And that's our target date for having the conference materials ready, is October 15th. It may be earlier if everything comes into place and there are no issues. And then so that allows 2 weeks then for delegates to review that conference materials packet. And we have a tentative date for the online delegate preparation session on October 29th, when people can ask questions, test out the voting, all those things we usually do the week before conference. And the actual business session to vote, including the budget, is Saturday, November 5th. So at this point, I'm going to allow participants to unmute yourselves. If you know how to use the hand raising function or type comments into the chat, either way will work. Raise your hand, type it in the chats, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. Again, I kind of have it grouped into those 3 areas, looking at this year's finances, review that, have time for questions, look at next year's proposal, take questions, and then the final session on fall conference and other items. But if you have a question as we're talking about something, there's only a few of us here online tonight, so feel free to ask as it comes up again in the chats or raise hand. Any questions about the overview or what we're talking about, or anything before we get started with the information? Okay. Well, if you're looking at the packet, these are going to include some screenshots, but also some additional notes, so it doesn't follow the packet exactly, because I know some of you have looked at that already or will be able to read that. So we wanted to go a little bit more in depth here tonight. But first, we're looking at the income and expense statement for the current year, and that's through June 30th. So that's just about over a month ago. And at this point, then obviously, we'd be expecting half the year, 50%. So as we look down through the income lines, notes that we have, the first one, congregational support, is what commitments were made for this year. Those obviously at 35% are less than what we'd expect at halfway point. Typically, we're not right at halfway because there's some delay in monthly and quarterly payments coming in from congregations. But this is a little lower than typical, so we think some congregation finance officers are just a bit behind on these. And so we would ask to have a reminder, if your congregation hasn't sent a commitment payment yet, at least through half the year to do that. If it's possible, we ask congregations, if you have the cash available and could make your entire payment by September 30th, that would be helpful for us just to get a little bit better sense of where our budget's going to be by the end of the year. Again, you don't have to. If you're a CFO that submits it every month regularly or quarterly, that's fine, keep doing that. But if you have the ability to submit it early, you can pay that final quarter or full amount by September 30th, we'd appreciate that. The other line items you see that aren't in there yet are the investment earnings for mission support and the transfers from designated ministry funds. Typically, we don't pull that income in until the end of the year when we know what we need. The transfers match up with two line items in the budget, so we wait to see what those expenses are and then match them. And then the investment earnings, that's the 4% amount on our investment fund, which we'll see later. We generally take only what we need to match our expenses, which in this year it may be the full amount, but we usually wait on that. I think we're going to pull in 75% of it at the end of the third quarter, by the end of the third quarter, because we're pretty sure we're going to need it this year. And then that way it'll help the conference see that amount when they have the September 30th statements in front of them. The envelope contributions are about on track for what we'd expect. Again, there's a little lag in those coming in, so 46% is pretty good for halfway. Congregation services, that's right about where we'd expect. Other income, a little more than we expect. Interest income is one where we're much lower than we would expect. This is the interest income from Pool B. That's the lower risk pool that's treated more like a money market or savings account. But so far, year to date, what's been posted has actually been a negative return even in Pool B. So we don't have that interest income to post yet. And based on that pattern, we may not have that. So we're kind of monitoring that portion of the income. So overall, we're just over 26%. We'd like to be at 50 halfway through the year, but most of that, again, is due to the fact that we haven't brought in the investment earnings or transfers yet, because we don't do that till later in the year. Switching to the expense side, again, through June 30th, we expect 50% again, ballpark. The insurance, we're just over 100%. That's because we pay that all on one invoice. So we were just over what we budgeted for the year, but that's been fully paid. Our license and fees are a little higher than half. Again, some of those were year memberships or year fees. So we're still okay in that line item. And then the same under communications, that includes some of our Zoom subscriptions and other annual fees. So that's why we're a little bit more than half in those line items. But salaries, payroll fees, the other things that are pretty regular payments, they're tracking right where we'd expect at about 50%. Our other note there is that audits are now being referred to as internal financial statement and procedures inspections, and they're to be conducted locally by a volunteer or on a contract basis. The church's auditor, Gary Dodson, passed away earlier this year, so he's no longer available to do that service for mission centers and campgrounds. And so the bishopric has provided a new packet, And we're working through finding some folks to do that for us here locally this year for the Mission Center and campgrounds, and that will be the case going forward as far as we know. So that's why we haven't paid that amount yet. We may not have to pay anything for an audit if we find a volunteer willing to work through those guidelines. So the total line expenses, 48%, again, right where we'd expect halfway through the year. Putting it together then, we've got our income and our expenses at this point in the year. Because we haven't transferred all that income, we have a pretty significant net loss, almost $40,000. We don't expect it to be anywhere near that amount by year end because we'll pull in the budgeted income. The one area we do think may fall short on income again is that interest income if Pool B doesn't recover and have better positive earnings by the end of the year. If there is a net loss any year in the operating budget, then the operating reserve fund is reduced by that amount, whatever it is. And then we're going to look at all those funds, but as we're looking at the budget right now, the operating reserve fund started 2022 with a balance of just over $114,000. So there's ample funds there to cover any shortfall on net loss for the year. That's where net income typically goes, net losses come from there year to year. We try to keep a balance in that fund of at least 6 months to a year of the budget. So we're in a comfortable place. Okay, and pause there and open up if there are any questions on the current year budget through June 30. Any specific numbers you want to go back and look at? Questions you might have?
Dan, this is Gary.
Yeah.
On the affiliate pool, what's the story about Pool A? How will that be handled?
What's the historic what of Pool A?
Pool A, what's the latest word on that? I'm assuming it's had a loss this year. Will that be reflected in the amounts here then?
Yes, it has also posted a loss year to date. That doesn't reflect the operating budget directly.
No, I realize that.
Yeah, the balance sheet. So we'll get to that next when we look at that. So the implication that has for the budget is that if there's a significant loss, then it lowers the principal, and then the amount we can take as far as 4% into the next year's operating budget as income would be based on that balance. So we try our best to project forward what the balance is going to be, and when we get to that number, we'll explain how we think we're going to estimate that income for next year's budget. But for this year's budget, we base that $42,000 number on the balance of the fund at the end of 2021 and took that 4% based on that. So we'll still be able to draw up to that full amount. Nancy, did I see a hand?
I did, but I see you just flipped back to this slide. I missed that somehow. You're encouraging us to send in 2022 Mission Center support in September if we can. And I missed that little piece. I didn't remember if it was campground support or Mission Center support. So now that you flip back to the slide, it answered my question.
Yeah, we just said for our sake. I mean, campgrounds would certainly appreciate that too for their cash flow. But again, it's just if congregations, if you have the funds available and you're going to be sending it anyhow, if it's possible to send it in earlier on the same check, it'll just help all those financial officers kind of get a sense of their budgets ahead of time. More so, we're kind of aiming at the congregations we haven't gotten those payments from this year, so that we can get a sense of if for some reason they're not going to contribute, we can make those adjustments.
I do have a question about that.
Yeah.
Would the preference be that we send a single check that will cover the rest of the year, or can we send multiple checks that cover each month, since we kind of like do our bookkeeping by the month?
I think that's up to the CFO's discretion on how they'd rather do the entries. So if you'd rather have separate entries and send all the checks at once, or do one check. I mean, that's up to you. Okay, I don't see any other questions about the operating budget. So now we're going to move on to the full balance sheet, which tracks all the other Mission Center, well, has the operating fund and the other Mission Center funds on it, which don't have a directly approved budget. So first, we're just going to look at the top half. This is the asset side as far as where we hold the Mission Center funds. This doesn't really give a lot of information, but just shows where we have it. So we do have 2 checking accounts, the main checking account we use for most bills and programs, and then a second account that gives us some flexibility for certain camps and camp managers to make deposits. And then we have 2 affiliate investment pool accounts. Pool A is the higher risk, but also potentially higher earnings account over time. And then Pool B is the lower risk, lower earnings account. These, the Pool A generally holds the funds we have in our investment accounts, which we'll look at later in the specific assets. Pool B then holds the remainder of our kind of non-long-term funds, all those different designated funds we'll look at. And we transfer funds back and forth from Pool A to the checking as needed for cash flow purposes. We also have a few accounts receivable. These would be, events and things that we're waiting for payments on or outstanding commitment payments. Then we have congregation payroll, now campground payroll. We're also processing through the One Mission Center Paycom account. So we pay those earnings and then submit the bills out to all the congregation and campgrounds. And at this point, we have 2 notes receivable, the Burns loans. A large one is the Campus Ministry Center. That is what's remaining on that property loan. That came back to the Mission Center when the Journey House Board stopped its operations last year. We paid down a portion of that loan, and this is what's remaining. We paid the loan with Mission Center funds so that we don't have the interest payments ongoing. Now we're holding it here as an internal note receivable that will need to be paid from ongoing operations of the ministry center or a future sale if that were to occur. And then we have a very small note receivable that was left from the Otter Lake building, which has been sold. This is just an accounting thing that needs to be resolved, but will be soon. So putting all that together gives us our bottom line of total assets just over 1.9 million held by the Mission Center. And then we'll go on to the various funds. So now on the bottom side, we have our liabilities first. Pretty small. These are just amounts that we owe. So these are just a couple things. The prepaid cards is a new one this year. We used some prepaid Visa, MasterCard type cards for camp directors who needed to have some flexibility to buy funds locally at a store during camps. And so it's kind of strange. It's a negative liability because we prepaid it ahead of time and we'll get those receipts back in. Again, small amount, but just a new twist on our accounting. And then the other portion of the bottom half of the balance sheet are the net assets, and we break them out into a couple of categories. The first are the ministry program funds. So again, these would all be tracked through the checking account and Pool B, where we have liquidity. Well, Pool A is also liquid, but we try not to touch it as much. So the first is the operating fund, which we've already went through the budget, where it's at to date. So it's the same income and expense from that report. Then the next 3 are for camps: Youth Camp Ministry Fund, Reunion Program Fund, and the Spectacular Fund. And we will we'll look at those a little bit more later. So there might be some questions about how camps are going. But basically, they all started the year with a decent balance in them. This is income and expenses tracked so far through June. Again, a lot of these expenses came in July for our camps and specs, so we're not really seeing anything near accurate numbers for that yet. The Youth Ministries Fund is separate funds from past years. This can be used for spec or IYF or things like that, but it's also available for online youth ministries, promotional youth ministries, local youth ideas that people might have. We don't get a lot of use out of that right now, but we've gotten a few different ideas for online ministries and youth groups and youth trips. Our Mission Center Conferences Fund, what we use for spring and fall conference. And then the last two are been kind of new and consolidated in recent years. The Detroit Property Fund is all of the various office and Detroit funds we've had in the past put together. There's quite a big income there this year. That came from the Carlton Sale Fund, which we'll see on the next line, was a previous fund from a congregation that was designated to be used for Detroit Hope or Journey House. And we decided this year, with the end of Journey House and really trying to get to a sustainable budget for Detroit Hope, that we would just expense that fund out 50% to each of those two. So most of this income is from that. The rest of it is from rent income that's helping us sustain the property. And then the Campus Ministry Center Fund, this is pretty much what was left from the Journey House board. The portion that came from Carlton didn't end up here. It actually went to paying down the note receivable. So it didn't really show up in this fund. It showed up on lowering that note receivable before it came on the books. So this was the remaining cash and investment pool funds from the Campus Ministry Center. We did use that for some needed repairs to the furnace and other things to get it up to code and operations again. And we still have a pretty healthy balance there. And just to note here, the question you did already ask, we kind of extended it here. If you had commitments as well for youth camp spec, family camps, or the Campus Ministry Center, if you could send those in with your other commitments by the end of September, that would help us know what we're working with for income this year. So these are the ministry program funds. Again, we try not to hold these in any long-term investments. We expect to spend these or manage them from year to year. They each have a sort of budget to them, but it's not one that's voted on by the conference in detail. Any questions on these funds before we move on? We will come back to the camping ones. Okay. The next section we have are conference designated funds. We've got 4 under there currently, but as you'll see, the second one, Carlton Sales, the one I just mentioned, that we've zeroed out for the year. So that amount remaining, we split in half, as was designated, for half Detroit and half to the Campus Ministry Center, which we applied to the remaining loan balance. So after this year, we'll just be down to 3 designated funds. The first is New Expressions. This has various different pots of money in it from different past conference resolutions. And in recent years, we've been getting from congregation net proceeds. So we track a few different things in there for different groups and grant opportunities. This is also part of the transfer of designated ministry funds that comes into the operating budget for the congregation mission expansion grants, if there are any. The bigger fund there is the Camping Gathering Ministries Fund. That was from the net proceeds from Camp Manitou in the Woodlands. So we hold that for use per the resolution. As noted down below, that has been approved by the officers and the council to be available for up to $50,000 each year, and this year and the next 3 years, to offset salary and benefits for the full-time camping coordinator position. We don't believe we'll need that full $50,000. We think we'll have income from our camps to offset a good portion of that, but whatever isn't met, we will use up to $50,000, with the intent being that as we grow new camps, retreats, etc., that position becomes self-sustaining with whatever seed money is needed from this fund over the next 4 years. And then our fourth one there is the Disciple Development Fund. That's been designated from previous congregation closings, used for a variety of purposes, primarily seminary, temple school, conference events. There's been some spec funds for staff registration needed for that. And then in the coming year, it'll be available for World Conference registration and travel for those who request it. And then our last portion of the assets, what we've talked about already are investment funds. So these are the funds held as if they were an endowment, but not formally restricted in any way. And we use the 4% spending rate to figure out how much we can budget into the operating fund. So this is where Gary asked before, if we have negative returns here, how is that reflected? That will show here, which you are seeing a large expense. Those are the negative returns posted so far. So roughly a 10% loss. And that will fluctuate through the year as the AIP returns come back in. The income there this year so far is actually from congregation closing assets that have been designated for that purpose. So whenever possible, if we have a congregation closing or a building sale, we try to request an amount that would generate at 4% what they were previously committing to the budget. So for example, this $25,000 amount likely was from a congregation that was committing $1,000. So that $25,000 now, in theory, should replace that annual $1,000 commitment. So that's where we look at this balance the best we can to project where do we think it's going to be at year's end. And then from that number, we will take the 4% to put into the next year's budget. So we're trying to look at AIP returns, but also we know some income may be coming in from closing congregations or building sales as well. Similarly, the Youth Camp Investment Fund, that's primarily a scholarship fund that was left over, and then also congregation closing commitments that continue to go in that so that they can generate year-to-year earnings. And so we will pull that in as a piece of income for the youth camp budget as well. The last one, the Campground General Fund, is really just a pass-through account. When congregations or individuals give to the general fund, we collect it, and then right now we're just using a 1/3 split to each of the 3 campgrounds. So it'll just come in and then be paid out in that way throughout the year. Okay, let me touch on the youth camp and reunion funds real quick, and then we'll go back to the overall sheet. So we don't have a specific budget that we approve for youth camps. We manage that with the directors. For our youth camp report so far, again, we don't have all the numbers in because camps, well, we still have 1 camp left. Actually, the new art camp is next week. Our youth camps just ended last week. So we did have 9 of our traditional summer camps, junior, junior high, and senior high at all 3 campgrounds. And we've got a new art camp this year at Park of the Pines. Overall total for our youth camping program, we're estimating at this point our expenses to be about $100,000. And again, that includes the full-time camping coordinator position, which manages all of the camps, but also does other things outside of that, as far as retreats and conferences and things. So we're tracking it all through this fund, but some income may come in from other places to offset it. To date, we've received about $25,000 in income. As I mentioned, we have up to $50,000 available to pull in for that camping coordinator position, although we hope we won't have to. So with that in mind, donations can keep coming through the end of the year. We know they will still come in through e-tithing and envelopes and other places. And congregations, if you have commitments out there for youth camps, or you tend to give an amount per camper, we ask you to send those in as soon as possible. If you send it based on the actual number of campers and need to know how many went from your congregation, if you don't have that already, let Jessica or I know, and we can look that up for you to tell you how many went to each camp. But we encourage anybody who's got a line item or a fund out there to send those in so we know what income we'll have. And then again, if you want to know your campers, let us know. And then donations can continue to go online through envelopes, however people want to contribute. So at this point, I'd say we need at least 25,000 more to meet our budget, but really we'd like to, in theory, get that whole 75,000 we don't have yet, so we don't have to use that camping and gathering fund, but we'll use as much as we need to. On the family camp reunion side, we have our 3 traditional family camp reunions this year. And again, we're still waiting on some expenses and income and those things to trickle in. At this point, our estimates are about a $4,000 net loss for the reunion at Blue Water, about a $3,000 net income for the reunion at Park of the Pines, and then about an $8,000 net loss at Sanford. Same thing, if you have any congregation line items or funds that typically come in, send those in as soon as you can. But any individuals who want to contribute through their envelopes or online can continue doing that through the year end. And at the end of August, we'll try to get a better estimate of where we're at. By then, we should have all the receipts and things in from individuals. And we'll keep posting where we're at for each of these camps. So that's a quick tour through all of the balance sheet funds. I'll stop there and take your questions and go back to anything you want to look at more. Okay, well, I'll just say, another word on the camping funds. I know that generosity funding can be a nerve-wracking for us tracking the budgets. And some years, I think it's our first year, it went really well. And then of course we had 2-year pause with the pandemic, and we're trying to re-establish our momentum here. So we're hoping we'll get closer to those numbers by the end of the year, continue to get the word out, share the ministry that did take place and the need we have, and hopefully we'll be close by the end of the year. If not, we're fortunate to have those fund balances we went over to kind of cover our gap and keep working at it for the coming years. I'm really hopeful that the generosity model will continue to work, but if it doesn't over the next few years, we'll have to assess what's happening there and look at other options. But for now, we're committed to that and hoping that we can get the word out and make that successful. We'll switch gears then to our preliminary proposal for the operating fund budget next year. Again, this is the what will come to the conference, but it may have adjustments based on input here tonight or what other thoughts people have from now until October, and depending on what commitments are actually made from congregations. So what we've got for you are the 2021 actual numbers, last year's budget closed. And then we've got the current year budget that we're working with, that we've reviewed. And then from there in the last column, what we're proposing at this point for next year. So just looking at each line, we're proposing to keep congregation support at the same amount total, envelope contributions at the same amount, investment earnings for mission support, we're going to increase slightly to $45,000. So we believe we're going to have enough in the investment support fund to generate that amount at 4%. Transfers from designated ministry funds will be the same amount. Again, that would come from the Disciple Development Fund and the New Expressions Fund to match line items. Congregation services income, this is the biggest change we have here. We're expecting that we're going to have to implement more fees for services that congregations cannot accomplish on their own. So what we typically have in this right now is just payroll processing. There's a fee associated with processing payroll for each congregation employee. We do have some congregations that rely on Mission Center staff to do Shelby entries, to do contributor statements, some cases all of the CFO responsibilities, some other things like that, that we just don't have the capacity for staff to do. So we're going to have to start implementing some fee-based structures for that. So if congregations that are currently relying on Mission Center staff will have the choice to either find a volunteer in their congregation or another congregation who can help with that, or starting next year, we'll have a model where, doing so much per hour or so much per entry, we'll have a fee attached to that. So we're kind of curious what people might have perspectives on that. We know we've talked to some of these congregations already that are in that position. Some are fine with paying for that service, recognizing what they're getting. Some have actually asked for that who aren't getting the service already. Could they just pay somebody to do their CFO responsibilities? That's not exactly what we're hoping this to be. We're not looking to just have CFOs pay for that, but that is something we would consider if there was a large enough need. It could lead to a whole separate position on that. Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, Dan, that's Gary. On that, I know our CFO has had your staff do things for her, but it's because she hasn't been allowed to get into the Shelby system. There's been issues. Would that be part of that, or is that extraneous to that?
No, this is for folks who won't or can't do it. Yeah,
Okay.
for technical issues, that's our role to support, but
Okay, thank you.
yeah, this is just the case where some congregations, sometimes for an extended period, have been using staff, which is, we've been willing to fill those gaps, but it's really not an equitable situation to every other congregation either. So that's the major change we have. For interest income, we've actually reduced our projection a little bit, just based on, again, what we saw this year, that Pool B may not be performing as well. We hope that corrects itself. That's a traditionally quite stable fund, but of course, the economy and the market's all very unpredictable right now. And then our other income is stable there. So overall, the budget is increased in this proposal by $5,500. Most of that from earnings from investment, and the other portion from what we project to be more congregation service income. Any questions on the income side before we look at the expenses? Okay. So then on the expense side, no real major changes here. Again, we changed the name from audit to financial review. We put a little bit less there because we think this will be done locally now, so we'll have less shipping and perhaps no cost at all if we find a volunteer. We don't expect any equipment replacement next year, so we've lowered that a little bit. Insurance, a very small increase, as we saw our guest this year was not quite enough. Licenses staying the same, pastoral care the same, office supplies we've lowered a little bit. We just do far less office work, more digital things now. The biggest increase there is for salaries and benefits, and we're trying to be conservative here. It's about a $5,500 increase. We don't know yet what our cost increase will be for health insurance and dental insurance, but we expect they will go up. And then we're expecting the World Church to recommend a wage increase, which we don't have to follow locally, but we want to try to increase at least 2%. We recognize that's not going to maintain pace with inflation right now, but that's what we're allowing for. And this salaries and benefits again pertains to the 2.5 positions of Mission Center staff, being the full-time financial officer, full-time invitation support minister, and part-time Mission Center president. We do know that this year I've officially been having both titles of president and financial officer because Mission Centers were required to use World Church payroll for both officer positions. That has changed as far as we've been told. So next year we will be able to fund those at the Mission Center level with our own local benefit packages, which will allow Jessica to go back to have the financial officer title rather than assistant. I would continue as half-time Mission Center president, so we'll be able to switch those titles back officially. And then Linda Stambridge would continue as the invitation support minister full-time. Payroll the same, communications the same, travel support the same, the disciple and development the same, expansion grants the same. Two small new additions here are line items for the Earth Stewardship team and the diversity and inclusion team. The Earth Stewardship team was approved by the conference, excuse me, I think in 2013. It's never been funded though, so we're hoping this will be a little bit to support their work. Yeah, and we expect a resolution this year to formally approve a diversity inclusion team. It's been working sort of as a steering committee over the last 2 years. We've been doing some great things. We think there'll be a resolution this fall to formally approve that, and then this would give them, again, a little bit of money at least to work with. Those teams can also rely on those other designated funds for various things, like a youth ministry or disciple development, but we wanted to recognize them in the budget and show that we have the team and they have a little bit of money to do their work, and can request then in future years more if needed. So I'll pause for any questions on the expense side.
Where does, is volunteer travel support like, when people are driving, like Dina driving across the country to pick up audit material and stuff, does it go under there?
Not for Dina or other staff. So for staff members, their travel is under the salaries and benefits. Dina in particular is World Church funded, but that's also on her benefit package. So that volunteer travel support would be for people in the mission center. So someone, if I need to designate someone to travel on my behalf to handle a priesthood or congregational issue, or someone traveling to a conference or retreat. Trying to think of other places, potentially for Mission Center council members who are traveling. It would be those non-staff roles for Mission Center functions. Okay. Well, then the comments we had, just to kind of bullet these out, we try to work diligently to manage the expenses, again, in the face of inflation and economic uncertainties. Often in the past 7 years since I've been in leadership, we've been able to ask for less from congregations for the budget and ask them to shift that to other places or just lower a little bit. This is just not a year where we're able to do that with all the rising expenses. We have held that line item consistent at $103,000. However, we've had a few congregations close. Some of those, again, we're able to contribute into the investment fund to replace that annual gift. That's why we're able to increase that investment earnings line a little bit. But not all have, or not have all been able to replace their full amount. So what we're asking is that, one, we're going to increase that congregation services. And again, if you're a congregation that's been getting staff time to do finances and other kind of routine things, there may be a fee associated with that going forward. And if you are a congregation that has the capacity to increase by, say, 5% or some set amount, $500 or something like that, we'd ask you to do that if it's possible, knowing that some congregations have closed and some congregations may not be able to maintain their commitments. So we're not asking for an across the board increase, but gauge your capacity. If you have capacity to give a little bit more to the operating fund, please do, recognizing some may not be able to, and hopefully overall that will keep that total number where it has been. So I guess to say that we're asking for, if we get more than 103, because every congregation increases and has capacity, that'd be great. We could add some more to some of those team fundings, or maybe lower the amount we need from our investment pool to keep it a little bit more stable during these rocky years. But there's no pressure to do that. We don't want any congregations to feel bad if they can't do that, or if they just can maintain their current commitment, because we know the same pressures we're facing are facing all of you as your utilities go up and insurance and everything else. So we're all in this together, and hopefully it'll work out. Any questions on our proposal overall for 2023, or any ideas on things you'd like to see different?
Overall, it seems reasonable to me, Dan. I have no issues with it.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, well, I don't see any other comments coming. So again, the point we're at now is to share with all of you and then get the recording out for others. And I know I've been hearing from congregations that have set their meetings already or are working to schedule those this month or into September. So what we ask is that each congregation have a conference or business meeting. Reminder that there should be at least 2 weeks notice given to the congregation. Schedule that meeting prior to September 15th, if at all possible. To make those commitments, you'll also likely want to make your commitments for the campgrounds, youth ministries, or youth camp ministries, SPEC, etc. Some congregations also give an amount to Worldwide Ministries or Bridge of Hope. That's part of the overall generosity cycle that the church now encourages congregations to get into. So we're a few weeks ahead of the church's generosity cycle based on our budget, but kind of all part of the package to assess your capacity and finances locally and determine what you can make as a commitment for next year. And then report those commitments to Jessica Montague. Her name's on the bottom of the form. The form's in the packet. CFOs and pastors should all have that. If you didn't see it or can't find it, let us know. It'll be on the website. We can send it out again as well. We typically ask for the meeting minutes as well, but we know sometimes that takes a while to get from the secretary. If you don't have that, don't wait too long. Just send us the number from the meeting. The minutes aren't as important. And if we can get those again by September 15th, we really appreciate that. We'll be reaching out if we haven't heard from your congregation by then to see what your amount is, or if you haven't had your meeting, when that's going to take place. And you'll probably want to elect your fall conference delegates at the same time. We'll get to that later, but check on how many you have and get those elected. And of course, if you have other pastor elections or local items to come up, they can all take place during that same conference. Yes.
Is this conference, November conference, going to be a hybrid again so that you don't have to be there in person?
Yes, it is. We'll just roll right into that then. Here is the fall conference kind of timeline and information. Our policies state that 30 days before the conference, which this year will be October 6th, is when the deadline is to submit legislation from congregations. So if your congregation wants to present a proposal or a resolution, anything like that, you need to vote on it at your congregational conference and submit it by October 6th. The deadline to submit delegates is 4 weeks prior to conference, which works out to October 8th this year. So you'll submit the name of one pastor or designee, one CFO or designee, and then the number of delegates your congregation has been allocated. That's been sent out to pastors. We can resend it. It should be on the fall conference website now, but if you have any trouble, let us know and we'll get you that number.
Dan, is the CFO or designee still an ex officio at this conference?
Yes, so the proposals made last year, none of them passed. So everything.
Oh, okay. I was thinking there was something on it last year, but it didn't pass. Okay.
Yes, we proposed some different changes to the delegate policy, but none passed. So still one pastor designee, one CFO or designee, and then however many allocated delegates. Every congregation gets at least 2, and then more based on numbers. And then you can also submit the same number of alternates as elected delegates, and they will be put into the pool to fill any open seats from congregations that don't fill theirs. Also on that October 8th, we ask any nominations for the elected positions to be printed. We can take more nominations at the conference, but to get in the printed materials, we want them by October 8th as well. So that would be now for the 3 campground boards. There are 5 positions on each. And then this year, we'll also be electing World Conference delegates. And Michigan has been allocated 175 delegates to the World Conference. So on that fall conference nomination form, I think I have it already posted. If not, it'll be up there soon. You can put your nomination in to be on one of the campground boards and to check the World Conference delegate. If you're going to be a World Conference delegate, you don't have to fill out the comment section. Just put in your name and I'll check the boxes for your demographics, but we can't print comments for that many nominees. So after October 18th, we will work on getting our packet ready. Again, we try to have it out by the following Saturday, the 15th. Hopefully by then, if not sooner. And that gives 2 weeks for everyone to look at it. And October 29th, the Saturday before conference, tentatively, we plan for an online delegate preparation session. So I don't think we'll have an in-person component to that, but we may.
What, do you have a time set for that yet?
I don't think so. I believe it's been in the morning in the past, like 9 to noon on that Saturday morning.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll also send out then usually a test ballot that day and give delegates the week up to conference to send in their questions and work through things. And it will be a hybrid conference this year. The First Presidency extended their permission to mission centers to have hybrid conferences this year, given the ongoing ups and downs of the pandemic and the uncertainties with that. So with that temporary permission, we're going to do the same as we did last year, if possible, an in-person conference at Blue Water or online through Zoom. So Friday evening, we'll have our welcome and our final delegate preparation. That'll be delegates only in Zoom. Saturday morning, business session, again, delegates only in Zoom. We'll stream for others. And then tentatively, we plan for Saturday afternoon to have ordinations and other presentations. And then Sunday morning, likely a class or presentation, and then worship following that, which being the first Sunday, we'll probably have communion. If there are any remaining ordinations that didn't fit for some reason on Saturday, those might also be part of Sunday morning. The fall conference webpage has stayed the same. Again, most things updated, but not every detail is set yet. It should be very similar to last fall. Okay, any final questions about finances, conference, or anything else? Well, see no one looking to send in a question or get the floor here. I'll just say thank you to all of you who've come tonight to listen and ask those questions. If you have other questions or ideas that come up, please send them along. Also, please help us in sharing this out to your congregation and other leaders you know. We want everyone to be as informed as possible. There really aren't a whole lot of changes year to year, so we know there's not a lot to dig into, but we try to be as transparent as we can. We post our financial updates on the website. Any questions you want or information, we will look into it and get it out to you. So if anything, you should feel fully informed and able to get whatever financial information you want. And again, we're open to new ideas, proposals between now and September 15th that we can consider. And we'll try to address all those. So if you've got those or know people who want to see things done differently, send them our way. And we'll consider all that. And then in October, we'll have an adjusted proposal if needed, and we'll put that all in the conference materials. Thanks to all of you. Have a blessed evening and take care, everyone.
Have a good evening.